everybody. Welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com.
Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I am AJ, checking in from Medellin, here with Erik. And this week we're to cover 9 destinations that you may have not thought about as far as using miles goes. I'm sure most listeners have thought about maybe 1 or 2 of these, but find it hard to believe that you've thought of them all. So we will get to that after the news and updates. Show notes for today's episode can be found at abroaders.com/out of the box. So it's kind of like outside the box, out of the box, but that's what we're going with.
It's a playoff of my favorite Brazilian Asian restaurant called China in Box, which does have actually pretty good food, despite what you might think if you actually just read the sign. I'm actually really excited for the content today because I learned a bunch of new stuff doing the research about some of these destinations. In particular, found a couple of new Fifth Freedom routes, found a new airline that I would love to try. You can't do it with points, but discovered a new airline I had never heard about. But overall, just kind of like doing this made me realize how attainable some of these awards are. And I think like my aha moment here was like looking at the prices to Aruba and seeing that they're literally the same as the prices within the US for a bunch of the carriers. So we've got 9 destinations that we're going to run through. And hopefully you guys find some cool inspiration about places you can go visit and get a really nice solid start about where you can begin to look for that availability and get planning that trip, as well as some cool tips. I didn't know a lot of the stuff that you and Janelle found about some of these destinations.
Yeah, man. I like the fact that we get to talk a little bit about destinations because ultimately that's what points and miles is about. It's about traveling, having the experience, the adventure that you want. And so I like any chance that we get to tie in actual locations. Another thing too that we haven't mentioned about these destinations is a lot of these places are really expensive to buy a flight to. So this is some huge opportunities for some big time redemption savings. That being said, let's knock out the news and updates and let's get into these 9 destinations. So the first one we've got here shouldn't be super surprising, but you never know when it's going to happen. Delta increased award flight prices to Europe in business class. So they did not make any announcements. That's something that irks a lot of frequent flyers, but once again, it doesn't really surprise me that airlines do this. I know it's not a popular move, but I mean, what's your take on the no announcement, just going ahead and making the change and having people find out about this when they look for award pricing? And just to give you context, we're going up about 7,500 Delta Sky miles for a one-way from between the U.S. and Europe in business class, and this starts after the 1st of 2017. Does it surprise you? What do you think about this?
I mean, they kind of took themselves out of the discussion of doing any sort of disclosure about the award chart increases or any changes about pricing when they stopped publishing the award chart. So Delta's stance is sort of like whatever the website says is what it is. That's the price. And, you know, their argument is just like, well, you don't really have like a price chart for paid flights. You know, you buy a ticket, you just whatever Orbitz or whatever our website says the price should be. So they like kind of excuse themselves from that dance, which sucks. And I think that it's really valuable that the other airlines still do publish their charts so you know what to expect. But this is just like a bunch of frequent flyer bloggers are paying attention and keeping track of what the prices should be, what they have been historically. And so even though Delta doesn't publish it, the information's out there, and you definitely really do want to know what the lowest possible price you could be paying because Delta's all over the place with the dynamic pricing. So overall, a little bit disappointing, but they weren't originally the best value to Europe. Anyways, there's a lot of other ways that you can get to Europe in business class for cheaper than 70,000 or even 62.5. So, I'd still say if you can find business class flights on United Metal, you can save a little bit of money. American's pretty good with their chart. Air Berlin is an awesome option to get to Europe, as is Iberia. So, unless you're in a Delta hub city, not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an increase, but we're not talking about an enormous increase. We're talking about just over 7,000 miles each way, which, considering business class, it's not a huge deal. I mean, I understand why people are a little bit frustrated because it increased, But I mean, it's 7,000 miles. That's not a big deal. Things are going to be fine.
And the last thing is that you get the same availability pretty much as Air France Flying Blue program. So if you want to book business class to Europe, the best option is probably to use Air France points to book on Delta or other SkyTeam carriers. The one caveat here is Delta sort of gets away with higher mileage prices because they have lower taxes and fees. So round trip to Europe is likely going to be less than $150 if you use Delta miles. It's likely going to be more than $250, or at least around $250 if you use Air France points. So if you got a little bit more cash on hand, you can pay a little more out of pocket. Use Air France. If not, Delta, maybe you got to pay a little more in miles.
Yeah, that's a good point. Moving on to the next thing, we've got a Hyatt promotion titled More Points, More Play. So this is a pretty typical looking promotion as far as it's tiered. You stay 5 nights, you get your bonus of 5,000 points. 10 nights, you get 10,000 points. And it goes all the way up and you carry over some of the bonuses. So you stay the 10 nights, you get credit for your 5 nights with 5,000. Then you get another 10,000. So we work our way all the way up to 75,000 bonus points after 25 nights. Now that's a hell of a stay at a hotel. But there are some people out there that spend a lot of time in hotels, whether it's vacationing or they're consultants and they're doing a lot of business travel. So depending on how much hotel staying you do, this is a pretty attractive promotion for people that are going to stay in hotels, especially considering how many properties there are. So you've got a lot of options to rack up some points with this promotion. Yeah,
Hyatt's good in the US, especially. I think the biggest problem with the promotion is that the time frame is September 1 to November 30th. So you've got a pretty limited time to take advantage of the fourth quarter promotion here. But again, like you said, if you've got points or if you've got stays planned, the bonus points are great. And Hyatt is probably the best hotel program besides Starwood in terms of value. Their prices are lower. So in other words, like 70 or 80,000 Hyatt points is worth way, way more in terms of free nights that you can get than 70 or 80,000 Hilton points. So you're actually earning points that are worth quite a bit more. The downside is if you're trying to use these internationally, Hyatt has fewer hotels overall. And so it may be harder, but save them. Like there's amazing properties like in the Maldives and, Hyatt's got some like incredible.
Yeah. Some of the aspirational stays we've talked about, we're getting those enormous redemptions for a place that's, pay out of pocket $1,000 a night, use some points to live the high life without being a millionaire.
Yep. Okay. So we've got a link for you to register for that promotion. You do have to register before the stays to be able to count them. So check out the show notes and grab that link if you have hotel stays coming up and might be able to use Hyatt.
Yeah, the next thing we've got is a targeted Amex promo. So what we've got is the Amex Business Gold is at 75,000 bonus points, Amex membership rewards. Now, this is a targeted thing. This is not a public link. So 5,000 spend in 3 months. That's what we see with the public offer. And with these Amex promos, you never know who's going to be targeted. And sometimes I think it's maybe not even targeting individuals via email, but sometimes you just check out the link and then you see a different offer based on, I don't know, something with the browser, something with your location. It seems to be that they toy around with it a lot because I've clicked around on links and I've seen multiple offers over the course of a month, depending on where I am, which browser I'm using. So I don't know, but it's worth giving a look if you're thinking about getting an Amex business card, because 75,000, that's a really nice bonus.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like 8 to 9 months out of the year, you see this at the standard 25,000 points as a sign-up bonus, which is really not good. The thing about this card is with the 3X on ad spend or on travel, it might be a card if you actually have a business that does a lot of spend that you just really get the card regardless because of the ongoing bonus for those categories. But if you time it right, at least for a couple months a year, it's either 75 or 100,000. Those tend to be really short. And then every once in a while, you get maybe a month or two of 50,000. So this, if you're targeted, is a great time. It's one of the higher offers that's available.
The final piece of news we've got is a Purchase Avianca Life Miles, and we're actually at a 130% bonus for a limited time. So you've got 130% bonus through September 10th, and then 100% bonus through September 30th. And one thing to keep in mind before you get excited is in order to get the full bonus and capture the value and get the miles as cheap as possible per unit, per your unit cost, you need to spend over $3,000. So you're going to get a bunch of miles. It could be valuable, but once again, like buying miles, you gotta know what the hell you're gonna be doing before you go ahead and spend $3,000 on miles.
Yep. So I would say, this is kind of a classic, use this promotion to buy business class flights at a discount. And just for an example, and I actually did the math and took out the tier bonuses. So if you're just trying to buy enough points for a trip from the US to Europe, one way you're going to spend about $1,000. Round trip, you're going to spend about $1,900. So that includes you're not buying any extra miles just because of getting a discount. So if you wanted to get, I think it's 63,000 miles each way. So round trip, you're going to spend roughly $1,900. It's a great deal on a business class ticket. If you've got a flight that's available, then you buy the miles and do it. Same idea with trips to Asia. It's a little more expensive in miles. It's about 78,000 each way from the US to Asia. So a one-way business class ticket is going to cost you $1,287, and a round trip is going to cost you about $2,400 with all the fees and stuff. So great deal if you otherwise would buy a ticket that's more expensive than that. Otherwise, feel free to ignore this. The Avianca people do one of these promotions every 30 days.
Yeah, that's something to keep in mind. If you look back over the past year, this promotion isn't something rare. They're doing all sorts of promotions, anywhere from 100 to 150% bonus. So like Eric said, if you got something in mind, if you would be buying a business class flight, price it out, see the availability, and maybe you can save yourself a couple grand. But unless you're planning on buying a business class flight, probably not the best thing to do. And that wraps it up for news and updates. So now what we're going to get into is 9 locations that may not have been on your radar for using miles. And to give you a breakdown of the format of how we're going to do this is we're going to let you know where the hell it is we're talking about, and we're going to give some pros, or at least what we think are cool or noteworthy things about these locations. And in some instances, there'll be actually bad things depending on what you like, but we'll give you a little bit of a breakdown on the location, and then we will also break down how to get there using points, what maybe your best options are, what your options are, different airlines that service these routes. So Eric, do you want to get us kicked off?
All right, let's do it. So I'm going to start off with Tahiti. Again, we do have some decent links for each of these locations. A lot of interesting stuff that we dug up. So if you're looking for any of that, show notes are at broaders.com/out-of-the-box. All right, so for Tahiti, Tahiti is located in the South Pacific. It's sort of between Hawaii and Fiji. It's a pretty small island and has one major airport. And so this is a really cool tropical type destination. There's just some incredibly beautiful scenery there. And I think it's kind of the type of place that's a little bit less frequently traveled. And so, it's sort of a change up in terms of the experience of trying to go to a beach type destination, but hopefully not being totally overwhelmed by other people. I also have read, and as I was looking into this, that it's got some kind of unique features. It's not just a beach place. So this is a sort of a really cool natural destination, waterfalls, mountains, lagoons, everything that you'd kind of imagine in a South Pacific type adventure. And also a pretty cool and different culture. The Polynesians are the folks that have been living on the island of Tahiti for a very long time.
Yeah. I mean, who out there knows much about Polynesian culture? I mean, I don't know that much about it. So that's a pretty cool opportunity to experience a culture that maybe you've not even heard much about, let alone experienced yourself.
I know they're good with boats. Okay, so now getting down to the nuts and bolts of how to actually book this flight. There are a couple of different carriers that service routes from North America to Tahiti. So the first one is that Air France has a Fifth Freedom route from LAX to Tahiti. The second one is a Star Alliance airline, that's Air New Zealand, that also has a Fifth Freedom route from Los Angeles. So you've got two airlines operating out of Los Angeles. And then last but not least is Air Tahiti Nui, which is an American Airlines partner. So you've actually got quite a few different options. Basically, all of the major alliances have an option to get to this destination. So if you have American Airlines miles, you're almost definitely going to be using Air Tahiti. If you have any type of Star Alliance miles, you're looking for availability on that Air New Zealand route. And if you have Delta or Air France, or there's actually a couple of interesting opportunities with some of the other SkyTeam partners, especially in business, you're going going to be looking at the Air France Fifth Freedom route. As far as prices, Air France definitely does best in economy. If you're using Flying Blue miles, it's going to be $30,000 each way. And also there's an option for premium economy with the Air France operated flight, which is sort of rare. There's not really any other carriers that have premium economy. So that might be worth checking out. It's definitely a bit more expensive. American offers for $40,000 each way. Alaska miles. Alaska's interesting because they partner with Air France and they also partner with Delta and American in terms of connecting flights. So there's really good opportunities with Alaska miles. And then last but not least, you can do a stopover on the way and do so even with a one-way ticket. So there's some cool opportunities there. ANA comes in sort of in third place with a 75,000 point round trip, which is between American and Alaska and Air France. So it's sort of a little bit cheaper, but you got to remember that you have to do a round trip with ANA. So those are sort of your economy options. There's one really, really notable one in business class, and that's Korean. And so Korean is partners with Air France, and they have a really special price compared to the rest of their chart. So if you fly Korean to anywhere else in the South Pacific or Australia or Asia, you're looking at like $170,000 on up for round trip. And for whatever reason, this flight from LAX to Tahiti is only $90,000 round trip in business class. So that's super cheap. It's actually cheaper than Delta. Delta's $100,000 in economy round trip. So thank you very much, Korean. It is a little bit tricky to book with Korean. You got to do it by phone, but they have access to the Air France flight. So if Air France is available, do it. The one other caveat with that is you can't connect to Delta using within the US. So you got to position to LA if you're going to take advantage of the Korean opportunity. The rest of the business class is pretty average. Alaska $60,000 each way, ANA as well, but that again requires a round trip, and then kind of going on up with the other partners. So we'll link again to more details on the pricing. The last thing to mention about Tahiti here is that there can be a massive difference in taxes and fees depending on the program that you use. So Alaska and American Airlines are going to be really good because they don't charge any fuel surcharges. So you're going to pay a little bit more in miles generally, but you're looking at like $20 each way in taxes and fees. Air France, on the other hand, you save some miles for sure, but you're looking at more like $200 each way. And by the way, that's unfortunately going to be the case with using Korean as well. You're going to pay pretty high taxes and fees, but again, business class ticket. And this is a relatively long flight. I think this is about 7.5 or 8 hours. So it's not the biggest deal. The last thing to keep in mind with the business class is that it's not fully flat seats, at least not right now on any of these carriers. So think about that. If you got a lot of miles, it might be worth it. It's like an angled flat, but it's not going to be a 180 degree bed. That's tough to me to spend that many more miles.
Check out Seat Guru. See what other people have to say about the product.
All right, cool. So that wraps it up for Tahiti. What's next?
So we've got one that many people have probably heard about, but maybe haven't looked into using miles, and that is the Maldives. The Maldives, I've heard it pronounced both ways. So what is it? It's a strip of island in the Indian Ocean. So this, if you're looking at a map or looking at a globe, you're just going to head south off the tip of India. I don't know exactly how far, but it'd be southwest of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. Yep. So you've got a chain of islands. And if you just Google image Maldives, it's just gorgeous, stunning beaches. Just the water's so clear. It just looks absolutely stunning. If you hear about people's trip reports that go there, really no complaints other than the fact that it's expensive. And also another thing, you might want to check this out while it's still around. Now, I actually was reading up on this earlier today and read an interesting article on National Geographic. So global warming and everything is actually not as hard on islands as scientists initially thought. That's what the scientists are now saying, unless those islands are very developed with man-made things building seawalls. And that is the case for the Maldives. So they are actually an at-risk island as far as global warming goes. Maybe some of you have seen the Netflix documentary, The Island President, which is pretty fascinating. It's about the president of the Maldives just lobbying the world to try to do something to slow down the carbon emissions and global warming and everything. But getting back to it, Maldives, Google image it. You will not be disappointed. Absolutely gorgeous. And I've also got some notes on things that you should be aware of. if you want the traditional holiday experience there, it's going to be really expensive. The resorts are expensive. The restaurants are really expensive. So if you are a budget in mind traveler, you're going to want to look into Airbnb. I saw a bunch of stuff for under $50 a night, renting a room with a local. And I've also read that there's a lot of guest houses. They passed a law, so they're actually empowering the locals to rent out rooms in their home. And it's common that they provide food along with room and board. And what I've also read is that it's just a really good experience, really great food. And it's going to be very affordable considering you could easily spend $300 a night at a resort. So actually getting into the miles game and how you'd get there, it's pretty standard across the board as far as the pricing goes. 80,000 miles round trip in economy. As far as the different options you have on the alliances and the carriers, with Star Alliance, we've got one option. Turkish services that route. With One World, we've got Qatar and Cathay Pacific, so you can redeem AA or British Airways miles. I'm guessing most people don't have Cathay miles or Qatar miles, so AA or British Airways is going to be your horse there. And then SkyTeam, you've got Aeroflot, which is a Russian carrier, and I have not heard very good things. So depending on how bad you want to go there, if you've got some Delta Sky miles maybe or some Amex points, you can move those and make it happen. And then one thing to note in business class is ANA. We're looking at between 130 and 150,000 miles, and that's a round trip because like Eric mentioned before, ANA does not do one-way award flights, and they are a transfer partner of Amex. So if you've got Amex points, ANA is in play if you can transfer enough points to make a round trip.
Yeah, really cool option. And ANA, again, is in Star Alliance, so they've got access to a ton of airlines that can get you there. So definitely worth looking into. I think the last thing I just wanted to mention with the Maldives, because I think a lot of people that are thinking about this trip are looking to have like the full experience. And if they can get the flights for really cheap, like $150 a person, they're ready to splurge on the accommodation. So there are some pretty amazing resorts. And one thing you might consider is like there's a couple of cards like the Hyatt card from Chase that give you 2 free nights at any property. They've got these like amazing hotel properties in the Maldives. I know there's for sure an option to get overwater bungalow at the Hyatt. I think there's also a Hilton property that has something similar to that. The one thing to be aware of if you're trying to do it with the free night type setup, where you've got a credit card that earns you a couple free nights, for the most part, you're not going to be in the overwater bungalows without paying for it. You can get one of those rooms and potentially get an upgrade. There's some interesting posts out there about maybe...
Yeah, I remember touching on it a year ago.
Yep.
But yeah.
So if you have elite status, that definitely helps. It might work to get yourself to one of those overwater bungalows. But if you don't, you might need to pass somebody a 50 or something. I really don't know. But if that's super important, you want to do some research there because you don't want to burn your free night certificates and not feel like you got the experience you're looking
absolutely.
for. Okay, so next up is Aruba, and Aruba is super close to us actually right now here in Colombia. It's just off the northern coast of Venezuela, and so it's like a far southern Caribbean island. Pretty cool looking experience. I had a fun time kind of looking at some of the options, some of the information that was in there. I think like the biggest pro to me is that this is not a super far flight from the U.S. So you're looking at like 5 hours, maybe 4 hours from Miami, 5 or 6 from a lot of places in the U.S. So this is the kind of thing like, I mean, we're going to be talking about places, flights to Africa, flights to the Maldives. That's really hard to do with a limited amount of time off. You really got to plan for that. This is one where you could pop out and be there in a half a day, spend a weekend and a few extra days, not kill all your vacation time. So I think that's pretty cool. Very strong tourism industry. I think this is kind of a place that's a nice mix where it's not so far out of your comfort zone. I think it's going to feel a little bit more like a vacation and less like a cultural immersion experience. So, to me, it seems like this is a cool destination for folks that are looking to get out of the country, but also see some places that are, a little bit more exotic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've got a ton of options. The good news about this is that everybody flies to Aruba. We've got Southwest, United, American, Delta, JetBlue, Air Canada, Spirit, and my new favorite airline I didn't know existed is Suriname Airlines, which has a fifth freedom route from Aruba to Miami. which originates, for those of you who don't know all of your capital jeopardy, in Paramaribo. I know I definitely didn't. But I would say that I would way rather fly Suriname Airlines than Spirit. And I've never even
I'd take the
heard
field.
anything.
I'd take the field.
Exactly.
Even some obscure sub-Saharan African airlines I've never heard of. I mean, at least it would maybe be funny.
It'd be interesting. Okay, so all of those you can do with miles, except for Suriname. They don't seem to have any partners or any prospects of you booking with miles, but tons of options here. I would say, so look at prices first. Start your search with Southwest. I found like an example for this October that's like 17,500 round trip. So their Southwest definitely, again, their pricing's based on the amount it actually costs in cash, but I saw as low as 8,500 miles each way. So there's some great deals. Taxes and fees came out around $70 with Southwest. So start your search there. See if the dates that are available for you are going to be in that super low range under 20,000. If not, it opens up to kind of the field where, and again, actually, JetBlue has the same system. So look at JetBlue as well. See if you can find anything under 25. And then basically the field comes in at 25 to 30 with all of the zone-based programs. So the one thing that just made my head spin is that it's literally the same price with American to fly from like Miami to Oklahoma as it is to fly to Aruba. So like any domestic U.S. flight is going to be $12.5 each way, and that's the same thing to Aruba. Again, that's off-peak for Americans, so there's some dates that are going to be a little more expensive. KLM is another option. That's Air France Flying Blue. You can book on Delta with that program, and the only price is $25,000 in economy. Business class awards are going to run you closer to $50,000, but again, I would say that you're not going to find a flat seat, and it's not that long of a flight, so probably not worth it unless you have a ton of miles. All right, let's move on to the next destination.
Yeah, so this next one is a domestic destination. This is actually the only domestic destination we've got here, and that is Alaska. So as you can imagine, just amazing wildlife. It's just a vast, vast state. And I mean, we're talking about Alaska. It's a enormous state, so there's a lot to do. But for anybody that enjoys doing outdoorsy things, going trekking, going fishing, going up in the mountains, there's just all sorts of amazing wildlife there. One thing I really like about this is an opportunity to get off the grid. If you want to kind of feel like you're getting away from it all, I mean, get outside the city in Alaska and you are off the grid. You can get unplugged. And a final thing I like about this is for some people that maybe aren't that comfortable going to Africa or going to South America, if they haven't traveled a lot outside of the U.S., you're going to be in the U.S. There's going to be no language barrier. There's no visas, no currency exchange. Like some stuff that I can imagine for some people is a little bit stressful. So you're still in the U.S., but geographically speaking, and as far as the experience, it's, a severe departure from, the continental 48 states. Now getting into using miles to get to Alaska, the best option, if it's available to you, is if you're with an Alaska Airlines or an American Airlines hub and you've got a direct flight to Anchorage, if that is where you want to fly into, because British Airways is looking pretty good on that. That's going to be your best deal as far as points and miles go because they are a distance-based chart. And as we know, the direct flights are for the win with distance-based charts because you're not wasting extra mileage on connections and zigging and zagging. So we've also got Alaska, which is at $15,000 for a round trip. Now, that's really nice. The tricky thing is lots of people don't have Alaska miles. It's a little bit more of a difficult program, difficult to get the points in there, but that is a really good redemption. And for everybody else, you're looking at 25,000 miles round trip. So this could be American Airlines, United, Delta, Aeroplan, Singapore, and KLM. And so those prices were obviously for economy. Now looking at business class, if you can find availability on Star Alliance partners, Lufthansa is looking good because we've got 30,000 round trip. That is a pretty hot redemption considering that's a pretty long flight depending on your origin in the U.S.
It's funny because they're also in that game with Hawaii. Lufthansa is by far the best way to fly United to Hawaii. And so if you've got United to Alaska, looks like they're also beating out the U.S.-based carriers. And the other thing is because it's within the U.S., no taxes and fees or very low taxes and fees for flights.
Do you think that these opportunities exist just because they're not losing much money on it? It's just kind of an obscure thing. So they're not seeing a whole lot of redemptions and it's just kind of an oversight where they don't catch it? Because some of these just don't make sense.
Yeah, U.S. people don't really have Lufthansa miles. By the way, if you want to collect some fast, there's a really good offer, 50,000 on the Barclays Miles and More MasterCard. There is a bit of a spend required to get all the miles, but you can get 50,000 points if you've got more than, let's say, 1,500 a month in spend. But yeah, I think that's basically the issue, is that like very few people in the U.S. have Lufthansa miles. They're not a transfer partner of major programs. I believe they are a Starwood preferred guest partner, but that's pretty much it. And so you either fly and earn miles that way, or you just really don't have them if you're in the U.S. And so they don't care if they're not competitive, or if, in other words, if people could take advantage of them because there's so few folks that are flying from the U.S. to Alaska that have those miles. So good for you if you know about it.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. And finally, on business class with SkyTeam, we've got Alitalia, 40,000 round trip, and then Delta. Once again, you can't trust Delta entirely in their pricing. It can be 50,000 points, but with their dynamic pricing, you never know what you got to get with Delta, so you got to just give it a peek. Mr. Erik, our next destination is taking us into a different continent.
Yeah, so this one's fun, man. This is a trip that I really want to do. It's kind of one of those trips that we got to save till we're able to be off the grid a little bit longer. Yeah. I definitely don't want to be stressing out about recording podcasts and getting those in last minute and stuff if we're in Tanzania. So that's our next destination. It is Tanzania, Africa. Some amazing stuff in the country. Lots of beautiful places, lots of wildlife. I mean, totally different wildlife than you're going to see anywhere else in the world. You've got Kilimanjaro, which is the tallest volcano in Africa, probably the inspiration for that wonderful scene in The Lion King. You got the Serengeti. You've got I love that we've got the Toto song, Africa, also referenced Tanzania. So a few things to note. Getting to Africa is tough. Right. So Africa is super far away. And I actually spent a little bit more time than I like to with my friend, the route estimator. I've got a link for that in case you're wondering how long it takes to fly different places. But the first thing I'm going to say is that if at all possible, you want to try and figure out a one-stop itinerary from the U.S. And there's only a couple of them that even are possible. So from North America, you're looking at connecting in Istanbul, Amsterdam, or Doha. Those are the three airports that have direct access to Dar es Salaam, which is the major airport in Tanzania. So now taking a look, and even there, it's not that pretty because even after you get to Amsterdam, you still have a 9-hour and 30-minute flight to get to Africa. Istanbul is a little bit better, 7 hours or so, and Doha is the closest, which is only 5 hours. But again, getting to Doha is the long haul. If you're coming from JFK, which is almost the closest point in the U.S. to Doha, it's a 14-hour flight. So you're in for a long haul. You're going to definitely need some extra time to make this vacation happen. It might be the type of trip, actually, that if you have a little bit more vacation flexibility, you might consider combining it with a short trip to someplace in Europe. Mm-hmm. To me, it makes a lot of sense to like split that up, have an 8-hour flight to Amsterdam, have a few days to explore, and then take the second leg. Yeah. Now, that will potentially cost you more miles depending on which program you use, but there's creative ways to do this and make it possible. In particular, if you want to make Europe a stop, you might consider Alaska, which allows a stop on a one-way, and then book the one-way return with a different program. Okay, so let's run down some basic pricing information. You're looking at sort of the best case scenario is going to be about 65,000 points. Again, ANA comes in to the rescue with a 65,000 point round trip. It's generally everything else is going to be 80,000. That's Delta, American, United, Air France. So pretty much everything's at 40,000 each way. But if you're definitely going to book a round trip, ANA is an option. They're a transfer partner of American Express. So that's one to look at. And I think that with that, you're looking at Star Alliance, obviously. So Istanbul is probably going to be your connecting airport. If you go Delta in your SkyTeam, Amsterdam's your option. And American is partners with Qatar, which has their major hub in Doha. So that's probably how things are going to shake out there. The last thing to be aware of is if you are looking at American miles, they have some really stringent and crappy routing rules. You can route to Africa via Europe, so you're going to be okay there. And I believe you can route to Africa via Doha, but the reason I wanted to mention this is that Etihad is also an American partner. Etihad also has direct flights to Dar es Salaam, but for whatever reason, American does not let you route via the Middle East to Africa. So you've got a problem if you're trying to make that a single ticket. So just wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that part. Business class, this is definitely one where business class is a huge payoff. Absolute opposite of some of the other ones we've talked about. So you're looking at roughly 140,000 round trip. Those are the lowest level redemptions with Delta, United, and Alaska Airlines for business class. Certainly worth taking an extended look for that. Keep in mind that you're going to have some sort of different carriers that are involved here. If you're flying Star Alliance, Ethiopian Airlines is one of the sort of dark horse candidates, so to speak, one you might not think of, but they have flights to a lot of destinations within Africa. So that's something that you're going to want to take a look at as well. The other ones are sort of the usual suspects, with Air France and KLM being the operators out of Amsterdam, and of course Qatar Airways out of Doha, and Turkish out of Istanbul. All right, what's next?
Okay, up next, we've got a place you and I have both been. I've been there 3 times. You've been there, what, a couple times?
Twice.
Okay, yeah, and it is Buenos Aires, Argentina. And there's a few things that just make this a really good redemption. Number one, you're going to Buenos Aires. So this is the city of nightlife, dining, history, art, just a really good time. Very affordable for many reasons. Unfortunate for them, they're having some economic issues, some inflation issues, some monetary policy that has been scrutinized, but the dollar is very strong against the Argentine peso right now. And even more so if you exchange some money in a gray hat way, I'm going to mention in a minute. If you like wine, it is cheap. It is great. If you like steak, it is cheap. It is great. And then finally, this is a great redemption as far as saving money goes, because flying to Buenos Aires is really expensive. I think a lot of people aren't aware how far south this is in the Southern Hemisphere. And if you price out flights, it's not uncommon to have the best deal come back at $1,400 for a round trip from the US. And so considering that you can go there one way in economy on most of the American programs, the US based programs that is, for $30K, that's a really hot redemption. I've got some additional notes here just because this is one of the places I've been to more than any of the other places on the list, is that exchanging money on the black market is a very common thing for tourists. I know that seems so sketchy and shady, but you're going to get an extra 30, 35%, 40% value in your money. So here, I will tell you how I went about doing this without getting ripped off by somebody on Cayey, Florida, is I arranged an exchange with my Airbnb host. So I told my Airbnb host I had interest in exchanging some money for a better value than the ATMs would give me. And she facilitated that with me. She set up an appointment where there's like a courier, like a guy on a bicycle, rode over to my apartment, came on up. I gave him, I don't know, it was like for me and a friend of mine, Scott's a friend of Eric's as well, gave him like, $300 or $400. He gave us the really good rate, and we essentially got an extra 25, 30% discount because we exchanged money through that route. Got some recent reports of friends that have done it just on the street, which I would not advise because it's just such an easy con. You're going to give somebody $200, $300, $400 and hope that they're honest with you. So the thing I love about doing it with Airbnb is that they have something to lose. If they screw you over, you can screw them over 10x, because that's probably a big, if not their only way that they make money, and they're not going to risk losing their Airbnb listing over a couple $100. So if you go through Airbnb, see if your host can facilitate that. And a final thing is, this is a great place. It is a pretty safe place, but this is not a place that you can just wander around anytime in any part of the city without knowing anyone or knowing any Spanish and be safe. There are some areas that are not so great, so you want to be aware of that and at least look into which neighborhoods you will be traveling, especially after dark if you don't know what you're doing. Other than that, amazing city. I mean, it's one of my favorite places in the world. And getting to the points and miles, like I said, pretty much across the board, 30,000 miles you can get there in economy class. We've got Alaska at 40,000 round trip if you book on American. So like we know, Alaska's got different prices for their partners. So if you can find an American flight, you can get that for as low as 40,000, but 60K is more the norm. As far as business class goes, you're looking at anywhere from 90,000 to 115,000. And off the top of my head, like it's a pretty far flight, but once again, we're not talking about great business class products. Maybe Delta has a lie flat seat on some of their planes, but I mean, on American, I mean, it's,
Yeah, I would say that you're probably best off with a Delta operated flight. That's probably going to be the nicest experience. American also has some of the new business class installed on flights. In particular, I'm almost positive out of Miami. I think out of Dallas as well. So again, use Seat Guru. Take a look at the product that's installed on there. I think I would probably spring for business class if, it's like a 10, 11 hour flight from at least some places in the US. So probably worth considering, but make sure you get the right business class product.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so next up is Peru, and there's some pretty awesome stuff in Peru. In particular, Machu Picchu is the spot that I've always really wanted to go. I've been working on plans with my dad for about a year now, trying to figure out when we're actually gonna go down there and do that. It also requires some advanced planning if you want to do the full Machu Picchu hike, which is definitely not for everyone. It's a pretty strenuous hike. I'm pretty sure it's about 4.5 or 5 days, and you're going to be going with a Sherpa, so a guide that's going to actually carry a lot of your stuff, and it's still super demanding. I think the highest elevation is close to 14,000 feet, and you got some big time passes, a lot of elevation change. You got to go down, you got to go up, but in general, I think it's a pretty amazing experience, even if you just want to go to Cusco and take the train up and see this place. I mean, this is like an ancient civilization that's just kind of frozen in time. So for me, at least, there's a huge allure there. Also, Peru is a pretty cool country, and I don't want to just boil it down to Machu Picchu because it's a really big and diverse place. So there's a lot of different options. It's got a lot of Pacific coastline. There's some nice beaches. It's also got a very, very, I was surprised by the amount of jungle and sort of wilderness. Like you think of the Amazon as Brazil, but it's actually very much part of Peru and also part of Ecuador and Colombia. So you've got some interesting geography. And honestly, when you go from jungle to mountains, high elevation mountains in the Andes down to the beach, you're basically getting every single microclimate on the way across. So it's a pretty cool destination with a lot of different stuff to do. Also has a nice culture in terms of sort of my experience. I've never actually stayed in Peru, but I've met a lot of Peruvians in Ecuador and also in Chile a little bit, and just like a culture that loves people coming to visit. So I think it could be a really cool experience. As far as getting to Peru, there are some great redemption options, and quite a few of the U.S. carriers fly to Lima. But there is a little bit of a catch that you want to try and plan around if you're going to be connecting to other airports like Cusco, if you're interested in doing Machu Picchu. So generally speaking, the flights are not super expensive from Lima to the other cities in Peru. You probably can get those for less than $50 each way if you have timing and do a little bit of advance. But as far as the U.S. carriers go, if you fly down on United, you've got Avianca that can make connections. If you fly down on American, you've got LATAM, which is LAN Airlines in Peru. And if you fly down on Delta and JetBlue, you're out of luck because they don't have any partners in Peru that can connect. So you're going to pay the zone-based price, but not get the benefit of being able to connect to another part of that zone. So just be aware of that. If you're going to stop in Lima anyways, it doesn't really matter because neither American or United are going to let you do a stopover there. But if you do plan to go direct to Cusco or some other place in Peru, be aware that you're going to have to buy that other ticket separately. Pretty much the same scenario as far as mileage as Argentina, which is quite a bit shorter of a flight. As far as award prices, Peru is actually kind of in an interesting position where a lot of the programs are classifying it as part of Northern South America. So American and United both have programs that distinguish between North and South America. And Peru is one of the places that tends to be in the north part of South America, which means it's a lot cheaper. It's going to be the same price as flights to Colombia, flights to Ecuador. So you're looking at off-peak with American, you're going to see 35,000 points round trip. And peak times is only 40,000 round trip. So 20K each way. Business class is going to run you between 60 60 and 80,000 round trip. Delta definitely tends to be a little bit higher. You're seeing their higher tier prices a lot with those flights, but definitely some good options there. And I think that this is one where availability has been really good. I know for sure that I when I looked to just kind of verify some of the pricing with American, I saw the calendar wide open for economy flights. Didn't look too carefully at the business class stuff, but relatively short from most places in the US. So probably a good economy redemption. You're getting a nice deal there.
Okay, we're down to just 2 left on the list, and this is in no particular order. So number 8, this takes us back to Africa, Northern Africa, and this is Marrakech, Morocco. So the things that I like about this redemption, or more so going to Morocco, is you can really feel like a foreigner there. That's a bad thing for some people, a good thing for other people. So, I mean, when I was in Morocco, it is a severe departure from the Americas or from Europe. And we were in Barcelona at the time that I went and checked out Casablanca, but you're definitely in a different place. And I thought that was really cool. It's very affordable, whether it's a hotel, whether it's an Airbnb. I know that there's some just incredibly cheap hostels as well if you really want to go on the cheap. Great food. And so like Peru and Morocco, as far as this list goes, I would imagine food people would say these are the top two food destinations on our list. I had some very, very, very good food when I was in Morocco. Marrakech, known for beautiful markets, people selling all sorts of stuff. And one thing that is really cool that I am ignorant and did not realize until I arrived in Morocco was they speak French. It is the second language in Morocco. So that's really cool. I had people coming up to me, speaking to me in French because they're thinking, all right, this guy probably doesn't speak Arabic. Maybe he speaks French. So I found that pretty interesting.
Marginally more French than Arabic, but just by a hair.
Yeah, just by a little bit. Do have some things to note here for people that are thinking about going to really anywhere in Morocco. Is there is a pretty significant cultural gap on some of the norms and the way things are done, the way people do things. First is there are some very persistent vendors, especially in Marrakech. It is notorious for some really hard selling merchants. So definitely if that's going to bother you, you probably don't want to go there. If you can have fun with that, if you like haggling, if it interests you, or if you just don't internalize that pressure they put on you, no big deal. Another thing is attitudes towards women. It's not the same as the U.S. and Europe, and this is not to call out Morocco for being behind in the times or anything like that. However, plenty of reports from some women that felt that the experience was just a little bit different. There's some attitudes as far as what women wear, especially if you pass as a local. We've got some anecdotes from our friends that passed as locals, and they were given a little bit harder of a time than, say, a white woman. So that's something just to look into if you're a female traveler. Yeah,
I mean, I think that the story you told me about the situation with the friend that you were traveling with, and that there was clearly a double standard for locals versus tourists. And so maybe that's a good thing for women that are considering traveling there. Obviously the Middle East and lots of parts of Africa have a reputation about not having the same standards and treating women as equals. And so that's obviously really frustrating, but maybe not for many women a reason to not travel to a place. I mean, part of understanding what's going on and why the world is not necessarily the ideal scenario that you want it to be is experiencing a culture that doesn't really think the same way that the Western world does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I do think there is a little bit of a double standard for locals. To give you a quick background, I was with a local and the police just decided to take issue that a local was with a foreigner and the local was doing some supposedly foreigner activities, aka like having a beer and smoking a little bit of shisha. For those that don't know, shisha is just like hookah. It's super common there. They've got some great shisha bars. So they took issue with that. So this place is for the more adventurous traveler. And that doesn't mean that Morocco is dangerous, because statistically, I actually think Morocco is safer than the United States. If you look up the actual crime stats and all that stuff, Morocco is safe, but it's going to be a little bit of an adventure, maybe a comfort challenge. Things are just going to feel a little bit different there. Now, as far as getting there, we've got some options for 70,000 points. So we've got British Airways, Iberia, and ANA. And one thing, once again, remember with ANA, it's got to be a round trip. You cannot cut that 70K in half. And then in business class, once again, coming in, the best option is All Nippon Airways, ANA, the Amex transfer partner. We've got them at 88,000 points. And then the next best redemptions are 115,000 in round trip, which isn't horrible. And that's going to be with Singapore and Cathay Pacific. And all the airlines I just mentioned there are either Amex or SPG transfer partners. So definitely Morocco. I had a really, really good time there. It's a place I want to go back to, spend more time, eat more food, meet more people, learn a little bit more about Morocco and the different cities. And shit, I didn't even go to the beach. So, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in Morocco. So definitely something to put on your list.
Very cool. And I guess the last thing is it's not far south in Africa like Tanzania. So if you want to combine that with Europe, it's also super short, you know?
I think the flight from Barcelona to Casablanca was under 2 hours. Yeah. So, I mean, it's simple.
And affordable. Not super expensive. Yeah, it can be expensive.
I actually didn't. That was one of the few. I think that may be one of the only international flights I've bought in the last 5 years, other than maybe a super cheap one last year to Bangkok. But it was, I think, round trip around $120 on Vueling, a Spanish airline that's based in Barcelona.
Very cool. All right. And last but not least is Havana, Cuba. This is honestly one of my favorite destinations that I've had the opportunity to visit, both because, you know, it's really close in sort of a cultural way to the U.S. There's a ton of history there. There's a ton of Cuban people that are in Miami and other places in the U.S. And there's also, you know, just that proximity. It felt like a place that should be a lot closer to the American experience than it has been for the last 50, 60 years. And so now that it's opening up, tons of people in the United States have an opportunity to take a super, super short flight and get to Havana and get to experience the place. Highlights for me: amazing food, really, really cheap and high quality. Some of the friendliest people of any destination I've ever visited, right up on par with Brazilians in terms of receptiveness and interest in foreigners and other people getting to know their culture. Incredibly safe, probably the safest place I've ever felt.
Wow.
That I've been. Literally like little kids walking around at like 11:30 at night by themselves, you know, just like 5-year-olds, you know, nobody's worried about it, you know. So that was amazing. They definitely really like Americans, which was something that surprised me a lot. I didn't expect that. I thought that there would be some at more distance sort of there, and there wasn't. You know, they were just really excited. And also, I think that carries over for folks that are considering Cuba that aren't from the U.S. You know, just a place that is really excited to share their culture and their country with other people. And I think last for me was a combo of the dance and, you know, the amount of dancing and just like happy party celebration and the music. Tons of musicians, people playing instruments I'd never even seen or heard of, just making amazing music with like, you know, handmade instruments and stuff like that. And so it's a really cool combination. And I think I mentioned this before, but it's really, really cheap in terms of costs of living and getting to experience the place. There are two different types of currency. So sort of one thing to be aware of before you travel is that there is the convertible peso, and then there's also the Cuban peso. And the convertible peso is pegged to the US dollar, so 1-to-1. And I don't know what the status is right now. At the time that I went, there was still some currency embargo stuff going on, and so it was actually more expensive. You paid a 10% premium to transfer US dollars. And so at the time, it was advantageous to get euros first and then transfer the euros. You're going to pay less. I don't know if that's still the case. I think we're certainly on the way to resolving that. But be aware, depending on when you travel, some US bank cards are not going to work in Cuba. So you want to bring cash to be able to rely on for transactions. Gabi and I actually almost got in deep shit in Cuba.
Really?
We left with like less than $5 cash. And there was like no way that we could withdraw more money. It was just like at the time I went, no banks would give money at ATM. So we literally like got to the airport on our last $10. So it's pretty interesting. So be aware of that. Do a little bit of research. It may be different by now, but at least as of a year or so ago, it was challenging to get money. As far as how to get there, right now there's only 2 U.S. carriers that have actually begun service to Cuba, and that's JetBlue and American. But Frontier, Southwest, United, Delta, basically everybody, and Alaska as well, have applied for rights to fly to Cuba. So we're going to see this opening up quite a bit. At the moment, I don't think there are any business class awards available, but unless you're coming from Hawaii, it's a horrible use of business class. So, great deal. There's also some cheap flights from Miami. So one thing, if you're planning travel, is to try and consider position flights to get you to a U.S. gateway that's got cheap paid service to Hawaii. That's something to consider as well. But highly encourage it. I hope, that some of the listeners out there get a chance to go experience Cuba and be an ambassador, in the sense that Cuba is a place where very few Americans have been visiting. And right now there's probably sort of a rush of Americans, or at least a big uptick in the number. So go be a part of the solution, go be friendly and go make some connections with people in a country that really should be a close friend of the U.S. And I'm super excited it's starting to be. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. That was fun and definitely educational for me.
Yeah, and man, definitely want to go to a couple of these places. I mean, the couple that really stick out to me, I haven't been to Cuba. That's so easy. It's so close to us. Tanzania. Our buddy Scott Brills with his safari company, Pamoja Safaris. We've got a close friend that does tours there, pretty much anything you want. So man, this is good stuff. I hope we've inspired some people to get out there and just go somewhere, no matter where it is. One more time, show notes for today's episode are at broaders.com/out-of-the-box.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Safe travels.
Hey, Broaders, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Erik or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.